Hi, my name is Oddvar Mo and I work for the Targeted Operations team here at TrustedSec. This video is meant as a primer for those that are not familiar with Active Directory and group policies, so they can get value of the rest of the videos in this series. If you're already familiar with Active Directory and group policies, you might want to skip this video and take a look at the next one. Thank you for watching. Hi, in this video we will go over some of the basics of Active Directory and group policies to make you better prepared for content in upcoming videos. So what is Active Directory? A simple way to explain is a database containing various objects such as users, trusts, groups, machines, services, printer spheres, and group policies. Each of these objects consists of multiple attributes. For instance, a user object might consist of attributes such as a first name, a last name, account name, even group memberships, passwords, and even more. Active Directory is also used for authentication and connects the different objects together, allowing management of rights and permissions. Active Directory is also one of the most central systems in a Windows environment. Most of the on-premise systems we know today use Active Directory for authentication and verification, making it critical for most organizations. Since Active Directory is so important and in many cases can be very complex, it is often targeted in attacks. In upcoming videos, we will go over some of the typical attacks and how to implement proper defenses against them. To better understand Active Directory, it is an advantage to know about some of the different components. An Active Directory forest can be categorized as an umbrella for the rest of the components. All of the other components live within something we call the forest boundary. An Active Directory domain is identified in most cases by a fully qualified domain name, such as in this case domain.com or sub.domain.com. A domain is where you create the different objects that you connect together, such as users and computers. Active Directory sites is something that lives within the domain, and when defined, it tells Active Directory how to handle replication and logons. What you're essentially doing is telling Active Directory how the network is linked together by defining the different sites. An Active Directory trust comes in a lot of different variants. A typical trust you encounter inside a forest is a two-way trust between a root domain and a child domain. It is also possible to create trusts across forest, meaning that you can share resources between organizations. There are different tools used to administrate Active Directory depending on what you want to do. Active Directory users and computers is mostly used to create groups, organizational units, users, and even computer objects. Active Directory sites and services is a tool that you use to define the site structure in Active Directory, allowing you to add subnets to existing sites, create new sites, or even more things. Active Directory domains and trusts is a tool that is used to define the trusts between the forests or between domains. AdCEdit is a tool that is a more in-depth editor of all the attributes in Active Directory. Active Directory users and computers does not show all the attributes or even the namespaces. With AdCEdit, you can view and modify all parts of Active Directory. PowerShell is often used to automate some of the typical tasks, such as creating new users or maybe even new sites, or exporting specific attributes for all users to generate a full list or some similar task. There are many different default groups inside Active Directory that grants access to different parts of administration. Domain and enterprise admins, as well as administrators, are often considered the groups with most access since they have full control of Active Directory. However, there are other groups as well that have very specific permissions that can be used to do specific administrative tasks. These permissions can be really valuable to attackers since they can in many cases be used to escalate privileges inside Active Directory. It is possible to use custom delegation to give specific permissions to a specific user or a specific group. This makes it possible to set up permissions for help desk groups so they can reset passwords inside a specific organizational unit. Or you can delegate permissions to a power user so that memberships to a specific group can be managed by the power user himself. You could even allow operating system deployment personnel to add computers to the domain, just to name some examples. Why am I telling you this? Well, the main reason is that in many environments, permissions have been delegated but forgotten about. And an attacker that identifies these permissions can use this to plan out attack paths to escalate privileges. Tools such as Bloodhound can automatically map out valid attack paths for attackers and use the delegated permissions it finds as part of the path. More on that in upcoming videos. Organizational units are used to organize Active Directory objects into something that looks like a folder. Organizational units are often shortened as OU. There are many strategies to organize the OU structure. Some prefer geographic, some organizational structure, and some by function. Some even combine the different structures. There are no set of rules on how to organize, but a best practice is to group things in a OU based on either needs for delegation or group policy settings. A recommendation for Microsoft is to not mirror your organizational department's hierarchy to avoid spending time maintaining something that does not give any benefits. In Active Directory, there are many different types of groups. There are two group types. It's either a security group or a distribution group. Security groups are in most cases used for defining access, thereby the name security. Distribution groups are often used in cases where you are defining mail distribution groups or similar. Groups also comes in different scopes, and scope defines how the groups can be used. For instance, a universal group can be used in all domains in an Active Directory forest. A domain local group can only be used locally in the domain it's defined. A well-known and a good group strategy is to use the model referred to as AGDLP. This basically means that you create accounts and you add those accounts into global groups. The global group is then added to a domain local group, and the domain local group is given a permission in the domain. If you are, however, in a multi-domain forest, this model is often referred to as AGUDLP. And that means that you have an account in a global group, the global group is added to a universal group instead, and the universal group is added to a domain local group, and the domain local group is given permission. In this slide you can see an example of the practical use of AGDLP model. In this case you see a normal user defined, and that user is a member of the global group called management. The management group is a member of various different domain local groups. You can see here, for instance, it is a member of the group called Shortcut SuperOffice Desktop. When a member is part of this group, there's actions behind that group that creates desktop shortcuts for SuperOffice. Another example here is a membership in the file srv file01 management.write. On the file server, this domain local group is defined to give write access to a management area. So this makes it really easy to manage over time, because when you add users, you just add them to the global group for that role, and all the other things are added automatically as part of that membership. Next, I will go into my lab environment and walk you through some typical things we do in Active Directory to connect the previous slides I talked through to something a little more practical.
So here we are logged into DC01. This is the domain controller in my lab environment. So I'm going to walk you through some of the common tools that we discussed earlier in the video. So if you go to the Start menu under Administrator Tools, you'll find the different tools I mentioned there. You can also find them starting the Server Manager and go to the Tools menu option. So let's go through each one. This is Domains and Trusts. This is the tool we use for establishing trusts to other organizations, or you can also use it to view the current trusts that are in play in this Active Directory domain or forest. We also have Sites and Services, and this is the tool we use for defining the physical layout so that Active Directory understands how to handle replication and logons and such. So essentially what you do is you create different sites for the different physical locations. So here we only have the first site, that's the default one, but you normally would create additional ones for each physical site. And then you would create the different IP subnets here and link them to the different sites. And you would also add domain controllers to each site. So that way Active Directory understands when a client goes to a specific subnet that it's supposed to use a specific domain controller. We also have a PowerShell module for managing Active Directory. Just to show you a quick example, you could do like get AD user filter star, and it will list out all the Active Directory users. There's a lot of possibilities in terms of management using PowerShell, of course. We also have something called ADC Edit. This is a really in-depth editor for managing Active Directory. And it can also be dangerous if you don't know what you're doing, so be aware of that. It also allows you to connect to all the different naming contexts. So right now I'm connected to the default one. That's the one Active Directory users and computers uses. And you can see a familiar structure here, as you would see in Active Directory users and computers. I've also connected to the schema context as well. And this is probably one of the most important places or parts of an Active Directory database. And we also have, as I said, Active Directory users and computers. And this is the tool I would say, most frequently used in terms of creating users and organizational units and groups and such. So one thing you would start out by doing is to turn on the advanced features. You find that under the View menu option, and that expands what you see in the GUI. It also expands the different options you have on the top of the Properties menu. So you can see there's also a security tab here, as well as an attribute editor. So here you can see I right-click the domain, and you can see all the permissions that are set on the top of the domain. And here you can clearly see that, for instance, domain admins has a lot of access in terms of managing objects under the domain. So this is typically where you look when you look for permissions that are assigned to the domain. Each individual organizational unit also could have different security settings. So that's also something to be aware of. Normally they are inherited from the top down. Okay, let's create some basic stuff. Let's create some organizational units. So I right click on the top, I click new, and then I choose organizational unit. And then I have to give it a name. So I would just give this the name of locations and press OK. And there we have a new organizational unit named locations. So in this lab, I'm just going to create two different ones. I'm going to do USA, and I'm going to do Norway. And then under Norway, I can walk you through just creating a user real quick. New user. Type in the first and last name, and then you need to assign a login name, and then you have to assign a password. And if you want the user to change the password at next logon, this needs to be clicked or checked. And then I click finish, and then we have a new user. The same procedure goes for any object you want to create, groups, computers, etc. Normally computers are not created, they are normally just added to the domain or joined to the domain by doing it from the computer itself. What is group policies? Group policies are used for configuration of user and computer settings. When you create a group policy, it is stored in two separate places. One part is stored directly in the Active Directory database under the System Policies container. The other part is stored under the sysvol share as a GUID under the Policies folder. When a group policy is created, it can be linked either to an organizational unit, a site, or a domain. There are two main parts of a group policy object, that is the user and machine configuration. When configuring settings in the machine configuration, it only applies to the machines that the group policy object is linked to. When you configure user configuration settings, it only applies to the users the group policy object is linked to. There are several categories within a policy. Software settings. This is mostly used when you are deploying software using a group policy object. Windows settings. These are primarily core Windows settings, such as Windows security settings, event logging, configuration of services, startup and shutdown scripts, and even more. Administrator templates are other Windows settings that can be configured. Examples are such as wallpaper on the desktop, start and menu bar settings, control panel options, and many more. Preferences are a little different than admin templates. Preferences was designed to help administrators set settings that the user could change later on. Administrator templates, on the other hand, are meant to be more persistent in its settings. All the settings we find under the Administrative Templates category are read from template files within a folder called Policy Definitions that is located under C:\Windows. These template definitions comes in two formats, either ADM or ADMX. ADM is the legacy format that was prior to Windows Vista, and ADMX is the newer and current format. One of the main differences between the legacy format and the current template format is that the new format saves space by allowing the ADMX to be stored centrally and also shared between the different group policies. The ADMX is also language independent and based out of XML. When adding new ADMX files, new options becomes available in the Group Policy Management Editor. A central store is a big benefit when multiple administrators are administrating group policy objects. By having a central store, you make sure that every admin can access the same set of templates and can configure and view the same group policy settings. It also makes it easier to maintain the template definitions over time. Establishing a central store is as easy as creating a folder under the Policies folder found under the sysvol folder called Policy Definitions. After that is created, just copy over a base of ADMX templates from C:\Windows policy definitions on an up-to-date Windows machine. To verify if the central templates are being used or not, you can edit a group policy and verify that the administrator templates are retrieved from the central store as shown on the slide. If it says retrieved from the local computer, the central store is not used or not established correctly. The reason I'm explaining about the central store is because we will use this feature in upcoming videos. Group policy filtering is a feature you can use if you need to further target the group policy. An example could be that you only want to target specific machines inside an organizational unit that has Windows 10 installed or is running on a battery, meaning it is a laptop. This can be achieved by using WMI filters. You can also filter based on security groups, meaning you can create a group called Windows 10 computers, add all Windows 10 machines to that group, and only apply the GPO to that group using the security filtering. To use WMI filters, you need to create the filter first. To create the WMI filter, you need to open up the Group Policy Management Editor and browse under the WMI filter folder. From here, you can right-click, choose a new filter, and then you need to add a name and you need to add a query. In the example shown on the slide, I'm adding a filter to filter out the Windows 10 machines. Another important thing to know about when dealing with group policies is something called loopback processing. This feature allows you to apply specific user settings on a computer no matter what user logs on. This is really useful when you are dealing with terminal servers or kiosk machines. When you configure a loopback processing, you can either replace all the user settings with the ones defined in the policy that has loopback enabled on, or you can choose to merge them together. A merge would be a combination of the normal user settings the user would get from all the other policies, combined with the policies you have defined in the one that has loopback turned on. Now we are going to switch over to my lab environment, where I will walk you through some of the steps we discussed earlier in the slides. So here we are, back at the lab environment. So we are going to go over some basic stuff with group policies. So first off, let me show you how to find the tool we use. So you can either use the server manager to find it, or you can use the start menu. The tool you're looking for is Group Policy Management. This is the tool we use for all things related to group policies. So here you can see there are two group policy objects, and these are the default ones. I would never touch these unless there's a really specific good reason to, because it's not recommended to edit those. So you have the default domain policy is linked under the domain, and the default domain controllers policy is linked under the domain controllers. Let's start by creating just a new group policy. So you right click and choose new, and then you can type a name. Let's just call it the first GPO. Notice that this group policy is not linked anywhere. It doesn't affect anything when we set settings. If you look at the default domain policy, you can see that it's linked to the domain. So let's go into the first GPO, press edit, and expand policies, admin templates. First off, I want to show you that this is retrieving its ADMX files from the local computer. So the first thing I want to do is to create a central store. Let's do that first. Let's close out the editor, and let's go to the local disk on the domain controller, or it could be a Windows 10 updated system if you want to, and locate the folder policy definitions. Here are all the ADMX files that are read with the group policy editor. So just take a copy of that, and then you browse to the domain itself. Under syswall, under the domain name, under policies, and then you paste it in here. And that's all there is to it. We now have a central store. So if we go back to the group policy management and edit the same group policy and expand policies and admin templates, we can now see that the ADMX is retrieved from the central store. So this means every admin will now retrieve the same ADMX files when dealing with these group policies. Let's do something simple and just create a setting for disabling the camera. So I'm browsing under the Windows Components camera, allow user camera, and then I'm just going to say disabled. So if I apply this group policy to a machine, camera will not be allowed to be used anymore. Okay, let's say we want to have additional settings. If we browse under the policies for the user, you can see that there are no settings for Office. So let's get the Office settings in here as well. So I have cheated a little and browsed to this site here for Microsoft. You can basically find it by searching for Office 365 or Office 2019 ADMX templates. And then you download this file here. And save it. I also don't recommend browsing from the domain controller, but this is a lab environment, so it's fine. Then you run the executable you downloaded, accept the license agreement, and then you need to specify a folder to extract the contents. And it's done. And now you grab the ADMX files, as well as the language pack you want to have for the templates. Copy that, and then you browse back to the central store, and then you paste it in here. And now, if we go back to our group policy and edit the first GPO again, and look under the policy settings for the users, we can see that we now have enabled settings for all the Office things. So that's how you add additional ADMX files. When we created this group policy, it got stored in both Active Directory and it got stored as well as on the sysvol folder. If you look at the sysvol folder, you can see there are 3 different GUIDs here. You can see on the date here that this is the newest one, and that's the one we created. So every time you create a group policy, these files or folders are created, and that's how when the group policy is applied, they are read from the sysvol folder and pulled down to the local machine and processed. The other part is stored in Active Directory. So if we browse to System, Policies, you should find the same GUID here. This was 09, so that's the one. So this is the group policy object stored in Active Directory. You can also find the GUID in the group policy management editor. If you go to Details on the group policy, you can see the unique identifier or GUID here. Okay, let's also create a WMI filter since we walked through that as well. So right click, choose new. Let's create one for Windows 10. Add a filter, and then I have cheated. I have pre-written this. But basically, it's selecting everything from the WMI class Win32 operating system, where version is like 10 star, and product type is equal to 1. Product type equal to 1 is the same as a workstation. So there are different types of product types. Saving that, and now we have an ABMI filter. To apply the filter, you can go to your group policy, and it should now be able to be linked right here.
I hope you got the basic overview of Active Directory and group policies by watching this video. I look forward to seeing you in upcoming videos. Thank you for watching.